Hello, this is our first math unit lesson on measurement. So hopefully you had a chance to watch the introduction to measurement video. And this is a lesson that we're going to talk about a lot of the same things. I'm going to be repeating some things I said in the introduction video. But they're important things you need to know for measurement. Since it's our first lesson, it's really good to hear it more than one time. So I want to tell you about 3 important things for measurement, and then we're going to talk about some words that you're going to hear when we are talking about measurement. So for measurement, the 3 things that you really need to keep in mind are think about what attribute you are going to measure. And we talked about this in the introduction. The attributes we're going to talk about for measurement are length, height, width, weight, and capacity. Length is how long or short something is. Height is how tall or short something is. Width is how wide. Weight is how heavy or light. And capacity is how much something can hold. The second thing is both objects must share the attribute before a comparison can be made. So when you're measuring items, we're usually comparing to see which one is bigger or smaller, or heavier or lighter. The third thing, which I think is the most important, is that when you're lining up at your endpoints, that'll give you an accurate measurement, and that's very important when you are measuring items. So I have a lesson we're going to do, and it is actually called Does How I Measure Matter? And with Does How I Measure Matter, there's a really great book that is out there, and it talks about how you can measure, or different kinds of things you might want to measure. So I'm going to put this book on so you can listen to it, and then I will continue with the lesson.
Me and the Measure of Things by James illustrated by Annette King. This is me on the dance end. I weighed 7 pounds and measured 2 inches long. This is me today. I weigh 52 pounds and I measure 48 inches tall. Whenever I want to know the size of something, how much it weighs, how long it is, I figure it out with weights and measures. How much? How much baking mix do I need for pancakes? How many ounces of dough are there in a bag for? How far? How far is the farmer's market from my house? Weights and measures tell me how much, how many, how heavy, how tall, and how wide. To measure dry things, I use special spoons and cups. This is a teaspoon. There are 3 teaspoons in 1 tablespoon. There are 16 tablespoons in 1 cup. And there are 2 cups of baking mix to make pancakes. A person needs 1 cup of milk. But to measure liquids, I use ounces, cups, pounds, quarts, and gallons. I drink 8 ounces of juice every morning. That's the same as 1 cup. When my husband drinks a cup of juice, our 2 cups equal 1 pint. And if we pour enough juice for my whole family, we pour 4 cups, or 2 pints. That's 1 quart of juice. And 4 quarts equal 1 gallon. Enough to fill my watering can to the top. With water, not juice. At the candy store, they weigh things on a scale. 1 ounce of gumberberries can fit in the palm of my hand. 16 ounces of gumberberries equal 1 pound, a whole bagful. And 2,000 pounds of gummy bears are the same as 1 ton. Enough for every kid in my town. Suppose I want to figure out my ruler. 3 feet equal 1 yard. Enough paper to drop a big poster. That's 1 foot shorter than me. And 5,280 feet are the same as 1 mile. That's how far the farmer's market is from my house. At the farmer's market, they use boxes and baskets to measure. We buy 1 pound of strawberries. We buy 1 quart of plums, the same as 2 pints. We buy 1 peck of potatoes, the same as 8 pints. And we buy 1 bushel of apples, the same as 4 pecks. It's easy to see why weights and measures play an important part in our lives. Every day we use them to size things up. To measure all things, 3 teaspoons equals 1 tablespoon. 16 tablespoons equal 1 cup. 8 ounces equal 1 cup. 2 cups equal 1 pint. 2 pints equal 1 quart. And 4 quarts equal 1 gallon. 16 ounces equals 1 pound. 2,000 pounds equals 1 ton. 12 inches equals 1 foot. 3 feet equals 1 yard. 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. 2 pints equals 1 quart. 8 quarts equals 1 peck. And 4 pecks equals 1 bushel. And that is the measure of things.
Okay, so as you can tell, that book discussed a lot of different things that are measured with standard measurements. It talked about length that we're going to be talking about. It talked about height. It talked about weight and capacity. So you can use measurement not just to compare objects. You can also use measurement to help with recipes. It tells you exactly how many or how much you need of each ingredient that you're putting into your recipe. So in the introduction video, if you remember, we're talking about non-standard tools. So this week, the lessons that you're going to have are non-standard forms of measurement. So some non-standard tools were things like pennies, paper clips. They can be big, they can be small, anything that you have at home. So the example we had in our lesson was we took pennies and we were comparing a glue stick and an expo marker. So we found out that the expo marker is 6 pennies long and the glue stick is 4 pennies long. And we started at the end, which is the most important part, so that you have an accurate measurement, but it gave us a couple words to use with measurement. So we said that the dry erase marker is longer than the glue stick. The glue stick is shorter than the expo marker. Those are some words you're going to hear when you're talking about length. So the objects I'm going to compare now, I'm going to use paper clips. Now the pennies are a little harder to hold on to an object, so you may want to put your object on the table and lay the pennies next to it to measure. If you have cubes at home, you can use cubes to measure as well. I am going to use some paper clips. Now, the thing about paper clips is, unlike the pennies, you can hook these together. Just make sure that they're all end to end. Sometimes paper clips will kind of get stuck a little bit and be halfway. Make sure they're all stretched out as long as it can go. And I want to measure and compare 2 objects that I have. So I have a stapler and I have a pencil. And I want to know which one is longer. So I'm going to measure my stapler first. Now, with a stapler, you see that this end is pretty much the same. Over here, the top is a little bit shorter, so I'm going to measure the longest part. Now, I'm going to make sure that I take my paper clip and I put it on the end of the stapler. I don't want it hanging off. I want it right at the end of my stapler, and I can hold it on there, and then I can make sure that my paper clips are hanging and they're flat and they're already touching end to end. So I can say that my stapler is 1, 2, 3, almost 4 paper clips long. Okay, so now if I take my pencil, same thing. I still have my 5 paper clips. I'm going to start at the end where the eraser is. Don't put it, make sure it's not sticking up above, make sure it's not down here, right at the end point. Make sure that they're all side to side touching. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little bit more. So my stapler, when I measured it, I had 3, almost 4. My pencil, when I measured it, I had 4, almost 5. So when I am comparing the length, I will say that my pencil is longer than my stapler because it took more paper clips when I was measuring it. I can say that my stapler is shorter than my pencil. So you can measure different objects in your house. My suggestion for if you're using paper clips or pennies, or if you're using quarters, nickels, if you're using coins, don't use all the different coins. Only use pennies at one time, only use nickels at one time, only use quarters at one time. You want something that's the same size. So you can't use pennies and quarters to measure your objects. But what I would suggest is using something small that's on your desk or on your table. You can maybe measure your chair that you sit in, but you don't want to measure something really big like your door or your refrigerator, because pennies, coins, paper clips, they would not be a great non-standard tool to use. In your work this week, you'll notice on your activities calendar, you're actually going to use a shoe because the object you're measuring is a little bigger, and that'll be a fun activity for you to do. The first couple of things you have during the week are you're just looking at objects and comparing. And that's something that's the first lesson to do is always good to just look and observe. Use your eyes. What do you see? What do you see that's longer, that's shorter, taller or shorter? Using the shoe is because we're measuring something a little bit bigger than a pen or a glue stick. So we needed something bigger than a paper clip or a penny. So we'll have another lesson this week on length, but hopefully you'll have fun measuring items in your house and finding non-standard tools that you can use to measure. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I will see you again for the next one.